I want to start where our keynoters left off, which is, let me back up. The focus of this panel is preparing for digital transformation. Obviously, we need to do smart acquisition across all of government, but we really want to focus on the, on the digital services and the new technologies here, and sort of how we can move agencies forward in those areas. And so in that space, thank you. Ms. Belt mentioned, how policy lags technology on a regular basis. What do you see as the foundational elements that agencies really require to move forward in these efforts? Are we talking about getting them the right IT cornerstones in place, or is this really the analog factors like the workforce, the governance, the policy side of things? And Frank, I see you sort of nodding here.
Yes, of course, I'll go first.
Yeah, this is dangerous sitting next to the moderator.
Like usual, doesn't matter. It's both, really. I mean, we both have to fix the workforce is an issue because the workforce likes not to change. And so there's inertia all the time to change. And that's one of the big factors that we have right now is who can do the change. And you also have to have a compelling reason to do this. And that's where the IT system usually comes in. I mean, why should I change? Is it because I can do my job better? Now, do I really want to do my job better? I'm just consistent with my job. And so there's a training aspect to it. And that's not only the workforce out there, it's also the acquisition workforce. And I wish that Leslie would come and yell at my guys more, please. Innovation is a word that's a dirty word sometimes. But that's one of the issues that we have. A lot of times we try to do, like, for instance, something as a service. And the answer we get back is, well, how am I going to evaluate that? Because it's not a set criteria for doing that now. Mm-hmm. And so between the systems and between the personnel, I think it's a mix back and forth as to, but as long as you make it a compelling mission argument, mm-hmm. and that they get something out of it as opposed to nothing out of it, because a lot of times they're always afraid they're going to lose their job. Right. So it's a question you always have to answer.
Right. Well, and we're going to try to not just go down the line here, but that's just too natural of a segue into your lane, Florence. So, what are you seeing in terms of? Do you agree with Frank's take about getting the workforce to wrap their heads around this being job one?
Absolutely. I think as a former operational contracting officer, I came from DoD, and the training was phenomenal there. And I think in general, the world of acquisitions, people are hungry for training, and the world of digital services, I think people are starting to chip away at the training process. I mean, there's the DITAP program, the Digital IT mm-hmm. Acquisition Program. I was in the pilot program for that, and there have been a lot of contracting officers, contract specialists, some program folks who have been trained through that. But I think people are hungry for that training in order to be able to provide and be proper business advisors for everyone across the board. But I think in terms of the foundational start, it's for agencies to figure out what is your strategy, like across the board with your allies. What is your strategy across the board as a contracting officer, and now with the U.S. Digital Services, you have to get everybody around the same table. The budget folks, finance, program, your technical SMEs, everyone across it's a shared responsibility to move it forward.
Okay. And Charles, from the industry side of things, where do you think we need to start?
Well, I think one of the most important things, and what's really foundational to this, is clarity of purpose. When you undertake these digital transformation efforts or IT modernization efforts, it's essential that you have clarity of purpose of what that effort is going to do to enable the mission or advance the agency in some way. And I think the more clear you can be about that, is it you're trying to reduce cost? Is it trying to reduce processing time? Are you trying to improve citizen satisfaction with a service that your agency provides? The clarity that you can provide around that sets that problem space that then the digital transformation or IT transformation effort is able to address. And without that clarity of purpose, it's hard to get people to really be motivated and rallied around seeing that initiative be successful. And a second kind of very related aspect of this is the communication side of it. Being able to communicate outwards, not only in terms internally to the agency around what that initiative is trying to accomplish and why, but also to the public in terms of how this is going to help them in cases where that initiative is public facing, and to your industry community as well, as to what you're really trying to accomplish, so that we can bring the best and most creative solutions to the table. And then issues around do you invest in infrastructure and workforce and policy, and those things I think are items that definitely have to be addressed in your planning process and how you move out. But I really look at those more as gaps that you have to think about how you're going to fill as you move forward on that initiative. But if you don't have clarity of purpose around what that initiative is trying to achieve, those things really can fall flat in terms of seeing a successful acquisition.
And Leo, thoughts on that?
Oh, a million thoughts on this. So common theme, right? So especially if you're on the acquisition side and you're starting off acquisitions or the contracting side, there's one clear thing that was said here is you have to have a problem that you're trying to solve, right? I think that's the biggest challenge that we're seeing when we start talking about digital transformation. It's a great buzzword. It's awesome. People get excited. Our instincts are to get a big sheet and put all this great technology we're going to throw at problems we don't really understand yet, and then we go buy stuff. Nobody thinks about the other pieces. We're like, yeah, we'll just get some training for our folks. They'll be able to use it, and we're good to go. I think it's a little bigger than that. I think my experience has been in doing some pretty significant transformation on the technical side is really building out the foundation, right? And focusing on that part right there once you understand where you're going. And I say that because that interacts with everybody else, right? Technologists are great at deploying capability. We're not good at building SOPs on how to contract those capabilities at all, right? We're not really good at figuring out, well, what policy ramifications does it have here on the non-IT side? So I think that piece around kind of that digital transformation is probably the most important piece. But I do want to stress, right, there's got to be a problem to solve, right? That's number one in the digital transformation. Tell me where we're going. Tell me what hill I'm taking. And don't try to bite the whole apple, right? It's little chunks, right? And maybe a piece of tech here followed by policy here, followed by an SOP, followed by a different way of doing contracting for that thing. And it takes time. I think the other piece around that is patience. I hear a lot of organizations out there right now, they come talk to me, they're like, hey, Leo, how did you get to this place right there? And I usually start that conversation with, great, it took me 6 years to get here, right? And they're like, well, wait a minute, we want to do it right now. And I'm like, once again, it took me 6 years to get here. I can help you get there, but these are those steps and these are those fundamental and foundational things you have to do to not just build a workforce, but build the technology to support it.
Yeah, I want to make sure we drill in on that strategy question of finding the right problem to solve. But I want to make sure we don't lose this workforce training element, because I heard Florence say that there's this huge appetite in the workforce to do this, and it may be a matter of just getting the right training in place, or that's one of the key issues. But Frank, you said something that I've heard over and over again, which is they say, well, that's SaaS. I don't know how to deal with that. And with cloud in particular, but IT services in general, there's this complaint that government's still stuck in a product acquisition mindset and doesn't know how to sort of deal with these service procurements. Is this a case of changing hearts and minds and getting people to wrap their heads around it, or is it have people bought into the idea and we just need to give them the tools and the training?
Some people have bought into the idea. Some have not, because they don't understand the idea. They feel that they're losing control. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's big. Initially we had the server huggers that refused to put everything in the cloud. We're past that, pretty much past that stage now. And so they're like, it's over there someplace, I trust it. They have Gmail at home and they play with that and they understand that. Now we have I don't understand what's happening when I do software as a service now. Is it standardized in a way that I can use it? Because remember, we're taking a system that many times legacy system took multiple years, that was customized to death, and now we're giving it onto us a standard that no one's know how to do it. Mm-hmm. And they're all like in panic mode because their job is changing. This is the training piece again. The job is totally changed. They see different screens now. So we get into that all the time as to what do you have to do. But it takes a while for them to, if you bring them into the process, as you said, you bring them into the process early and say, hey, we're going to change things because it's for the betterment of the organization. Now, you can't say cost. If you say cost, it's a terrible thing. You never want to talk about cost. You want to talk about mission effectiveness, because if you say we're going to cut costs, they're like, oh, well, that means my job. I mean, that's what they think right off. So talk about mission effectiveness and how they can actually support the mission and get them to buy into it. Now, most good ideas take about 2 years, I found, to actually, from the time you say, here's a good idea, to the time that you get the populace to say them back to you, hey, that's a good idea, which they think is their idea at that point in time. And you say, hey, that's really a great idea, I think you should go implement it. But that's about the cycle I've found now, about 2 years.
So what you just said is that Leo's had 3 good ideas over the last 6 years.
Or he's just slow.
No, I actually, you know what? I think that's an interesting way to put it, and I would almost put it. And where's she from DISA, right? So this gets to like when you have things like BDP and you start moving up the chain, right? I think that's correct, right? I think there was this initial pace where I said, hey, I needed to be fast at what I did. I needed to do big data real smart. So we built a big data platform, and then we realized we're not fast at this, so we transitioned to agile in a very smart way, right? And then, well, we need to be faster. Then you go to full DevOps, right? So I think there is a natural progression, and I think that 18 to 24 months is real, and that's 18 to 24 months not just for buy-in, cultural change, getting folks trained, but also to change your policies, change the way you do business. I do want to hit one piece right there, and I'm glad we mentioned it when we talked. So digital transformation, the reality is the workforce is going to change, right? So part of this is thinking that we're going from building the Model T in a factory to now having CNC machines do it for you on their own, automated. Those jobs changed. Right? We don't have folks on a line anymore, right? Now we have a couple of engineering technicians working on some PLCs, right? And 2 robot guys, right? That is real. That's a real transformation. And part of this digital transformation is understanding where you fit in that space. So there is a huge human capital piece to make sure that whether we're training our folks and upskilling them, right, or transitioning them to other functions, they're there. And to be frank, most of the digital transformation stuff that I've seen, if you talk to folks and corporate folks that are here will get this, right? There's a little bit of a fallacy on jobs go away and it gets a lot cheaper. We just really transition where the workforce is doing the work, right?
Well, and that goes back to the president's management agenda and want to free people up for the high value work. And you raised the point about people throughout government. I want to make sure we sort of draw the focus back in on the acquisition professionals, at least for now. And Florence, what's your take on what Frank said? As you go out and try and talk to people about this is how to think about this differently, are you still in persuasion mode? Is it they just need the training? Where's the bottleneck or the friction point now?
I think some of the fear comes from not knowing what some of this technology is. Most contracting officers, contract specialists, folks who are doing the deals are not technologists. So you put IaaS in front of them, you start saying software as a service, and they're like, well, wait a minute. Do I start with a SUE? Do I start with a PW? Like, people want to use their same tools to move into a new space. And you can, to a certain extent, but I think you have to first understand what that technology is and be willing to have the conversations with your engineers, with your different technologists. And the way that a lot of contracting shops are set up, you're not face-to-face with your technologists. And oftentimes when you contract for a service, we're talking about contracts here, but there are many ways to bring these services, to procure these services, right? So when you are going about solving a problem or trying to figure out what is the problem, I think the acquisition workforce has got to first have give themselves the patience and have the patience of understanding what is it that we're buying. Like, what is this? What are these solutions? And there's training for that, and there's the at-home training, like jump onto YouTube and figure something out. Like do it on your own first. If you can't find it through DAU or FAI, I believe in self-learning. I did a lot of that on my own, and then I did phone a friend. If you have your engineers who you work, I've the luxury now within USDS. Our space is we share a space. I can if I have a question about anything, I can go to my technologist and ask them. But I think you have to understand the technology first in order to know how to be a business advisor and provide and go and seek the solutions in order to also have that conversation with folks in industry. Because I think people will sometimes feel like they're being talked at and being told we need a solution quickly, but they don't know even what that solution is.
Yeah, and Charles, we're going to come to the how industry can help in this in just a second, but the challenge of helping people learn this, are the training resources in place yet for the motivated contracting officer? Can they go to DAU? Can they reach out to Leslie's shop? She mentioned several different vehicles and resources this morning. Is this just about having time to move things through the pipeline, or are there still real gaps in the resources that need to be added so that people can acquire for digital transformation?
So I'll answer this question because so yeah, there's some fundamental challenges that are still out there, and a lot of it is training. To answer your question on our folks out there, yeah, DAU right now is spinning up a program to really focus on even agile software development. So that's a great example of where we have some challenges with contracting officers and with the acquisition community, is understanding that the world has changed. It's not about a unit cost. I can't walk in and tell you I'm going to get this at the end of the day, right? If you're true to agile and you're developing software with your customer, right? Maybe I can forecast 6 months out, but I can't forecast 12, 18 months out. And putting that into a contract model that we're used to is very difficult. So I know DAU is working really hard right now on setting up a program very much focused on agile software development and how contracts and IT acquisition folks can shape them to support those. So I think a lot of it is going to be still kind of changing hearts and minds from the traditional model, and that's the real transformation that needs to happen.
Also, I think it's the flexibility of the contracting officer.
Yep.
Because I ran an agile programming thing, and we told the contracting officer, we're going to change everything every 6 months, just understand that, And initial pushback was, of course, how can you possibly do that? And we said, well, we're just going to do it. We can't tell you what's going to come out after 6 months or 3 months, because we had sprint cycles of like 2 months, So eventually, the contracting officer got to the point of saying, I'm now understanding what you're doing, and went along with it. But that education, maybe hands-on education may be better than just, going to DAU or something, and that may be the easier way of doing it for them.
And Charles, what do you see as the industry partner, both in terms of that, is the question of being willing versus able on the government contracting side, and how do you find yourself and your organization being pulled in to help move this process along?
Well, it's really hard to tell from the outside whether it's a problem of willing or able, but what I will say is that we can definitely tell when we receive, say, requests for proposal where there's a lot of technical expertise and understanding of the modern technologies and modern, say, processes that are being requested versus those that don't. And so I think in general, we're seeing more procurements coming out now that really are getting in tune with kind of the most recent ways of doing IT transformation efforts and agile and so forth. But I'd say it's still not as much as we would like to see. Few things are, a lot of procurements still come out basically specifying we want this number of people in these labor categories, and that doesn't really give the contracting community any flexibility around providing creativity in the solution. And in many cases, what's being asked for may not be the best, configuration of people needed, and that kind of goes back to the issue around the workforce. For example, if schedules aren't being maintained to reflect the current, say, technology capabilities that exist, then we can't bid the people that, or we cannot easily bid the people that you need in order to accomplish the job. So I think that's one thing. Where industry, I think, can help in this, I think, first of all, Florence mentioned, there is a wealth of online information available today. I mean, I think that taking advantage of that, Coursera and other these massive online universities are great places to go. A lot of the content is free. It spans both technical and business topics, and and I think that's a great way to learn yourself. And a lot of the technology partners that we work with also there's been a big trend lately that they're all just now starting to publish everything they have on their technology stacks and on how customers interact with those technology stacks online, instead of you having to, say, register for a course. So if you're willing to do a little bit of searching and Googling and using Coursera, I think there's a lot of information out there. And then companies like SEIC, we're always willing to come in and meet with staff meet with acquisition professionals on our understanding of the current state of technology, how, say commercial companies are buying these technologies and how they're engaging, and, share that information around that as well. So, and I think one other thing Florence mentioned that I think is really important was the shared space that you mentioned. You talked about how you have acquisition professionals sitting alongside technical folks. And that, by the way, is another major trend that's occurring even in IT operations or even internal to say how SCSC would do business, is really creating these shared spaces where you bring diverse skill sets together into the same space and they work together on that initiative, as opposed to having the procurement arm sitting over here and the server people over here and the cloud people over there. Getting them all into the same shared space to work together on that initiative greatly improves information flow, and I think can help make those initiatives much more successful.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think it's unlikely we're going to sort of across government fold the contracting officers in with the technologists at scale anytime soon. So given that that's one limitation, can some of this be addressed by having best-in-class acquisition vehicles that other agencies can piggyback onto? Is part of the problem that agencies can't go craft every vehicle they need for this themselves? Is there a way to use, whether it's a digital services BPA, or we had one audience member talk about everyone wanting to get on the State Department video production contract, which is not exactly the scope of work that we're talking about, but a similar challenge of, we don't know how to do this. Can GWACs and other vehicles help solve this, or is that too much of a lowest common denominator solution?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, they absolutely can help solve this problem. I mean, one of the big things we're seeing definitely coming out of government across all of government, whether we're talking the intelligence community or DoD or the federal civilian space, is speed, right? And I think these big vehicles do enable you to get to a request faster and get the evaluation completed and awarded much faster. It removes a lot of the burden in that acquisition process. So one of the key things around using these big vehicles is just making sure that the vehicle that you're using actually can handle the scope of work that you're trying to accomplish. And I think that's even more relevant today than it has been in the past, because one of the things that's happening with new technologies is that things are blending. What we might have considered to be a device and a thing, or a commercial item, and something that's over here that's IT, these things are now merging and becoming the same thing. So you want to look at vehicles, like Alliant, for example, that have a nice broad scope that allow you to craft an acquisition that's really going to meet the broad needs that you're going to have in these digital transformation efforts.
Yeah.
But I think in addition to the GWACs, the different vehicles that we can go about using, I think there are a lot of people within the acquisition workforce want to phone a friend, want to reach out and touch someone and say, how did you do that? One way that we're going about trying to solve that problem or provide a solution for that is within the Tech FAR Hub. If you haven't been there are case studies there for acquisitions that have been done for any of the, a number of digital services. And so we'll say, this is what the problem was. These are the different steps that were taken. We put out an RFI, and then we put out and a SUE, and here's an example of the SUE, and here are the evaluation, and then eventually here's the evaluation criteria and what worked and what didn't work. And here are the different players that participated in that. And if it's similar, give us a call or send me an email. I'm a number of our team, we're all responsive, but it's also when you go on FedBizOps and you go to the bottom and you see that contract specialist or contracting officer's name, phone that person, call that, ask them and reach out and make those connections. Besides the, at the top layer, looking at it across the different contract vehicles and ways you can get to it. I think a lot of the people on the ground are just hungry for who has done this thing before. And there's very little that's new under the sun, right? So you can there's across the evolutionary scale, different agencies are ahead of others. And so if you look at who has already gone and crossed that particular gate, I can learn. It may not take me 6 years, but it may take me 3, or it may take me 2, or it may take 6 months, because I'll learn the lessons from, those who have kind of, bumped along the way and then become successful. But I think it's a matter of really looking at the entire organization, all across the federal government and industry partners, as resources to leverage.
Okay. Leah, what sort of tools do you try and pull out of the toolbox to address this? Are you looking to these broader vehicles, or are you really still trying to make sure that people can have the skills to build their own?
Everything I'm doing, I'm using these large vehicles. So my contracts officer would not be happy with me. I'm a big fan of assisted acquisition. I think you get folks that are experts to get this done, and you take that off the plate of PMs. That's a no-brainer to me. Like, DoD doesn't pay me to be a pseudo contracts officer. They pay me to be a technologist, right? So let me go do that work. Let experts do that work. And I am a big fan. I think Alliance is a good one. I think Oasis is another one that has it's just broad enough with the right skill sets. I think we're getting better at writing these bigger contracts like that. But I'm with you. I think one of the challenges that I've seen is I get a lot of phone calls on specifically, let's say on how one of my vehicles is written, and folks are like, hey, we want to jump on board, we're going to give you money, and I'm like, hey, here's the contract, go work on this. And there's still some education to be done, especially when you start talking, and again, DoD optic here, on capability-based, performance-based contracts, as opposed to like unit cost and very fixed delivery in the IT space. I think we're finding that the mood is shifting in that direction, right? And the way people are operating now, and IT departments are operating, and capability developers are operating, right, requires that type of contract work as opposed to what we've been used to in the past. So I'm a big fan. I think it makes sense. Let me do what I'm good at, not what I'm not good at. That's dangerous.
Yeah, and Frank, thoughts on the assisted acquisition?
We're using a lot of GWACs too. I mean, I think we use all of them.
Yeah.
But the problem we're having with the contracting community or the acquisition community is they don't understand SLAs. And I think that is one of the issues that we have. And as we go forward, as we buy more and more capabilities, more services, whatever, they look at SLAs and say, I don't understand. Dump it back to the tech guys. Is this the way we want to go or not? And it's a question of educating everybody on SLAs, what they actually mean and what you actually get out of it. Because, we've gone through the cloud SLAs now, but there's all sorts of other services that we get on top of the clouds, and what does that mean now? And what is their SLA components that we have to actually watch and look at? And then how do you measure it? The acquisition people always want to know that. We want to know that on the tech side. How am I going to measure this to make sure you're compliant? And so that's been a big issue with us right now as we move more and more towards capability acquisitions.
Okay.
Yeah, I jump on what Frank said. That's the biggest request that I get. And I get a lot of requests of, hey, can you come help us shape our SLAs? And a lot of it is just training folks and getting them some experience on making that happen.
Well, and you made the point, Leah, that your job is not to be an ad hoc contracting officer. It's to be a technologist. And we need the acquisition professionals to understand the technology better, but we're also not paying them to become technologists. Right. So is the key to this putting a technologist in the room with them for these vehicles? I think what I hear is that there's no substitute for bringing in the expert to help shape this, that there's only so much self-learning from YouTube that our contracting officers can do. Is that a fair assessment, that we've got to get the technologists in early?
Oh, for sure, right? Same thing on cybersecurity, right? If you're building a program and you don't have your cybersecurity guys and gals sitting in the room the day before you even started the requirements process, you've already failed, right? So I think it does boil down to having those folks in.
When I'm seeing everyone nod, are there enough technologists to put in the rooms that we need? And if not, how do we scale? I think USDS does wonderful work, but unless you guys get increased in size 20-fold, there aren't enough Lawrences to go out and help everyone. How do we deal with that particular expertise shortage?
So I think there's some challenges, right? I think we're seeing some human capital challenges right now within the federal space, right? Competition stuff out there. I think we were talking earlier, right? What's the impact of Amazon sitting down in the National Capital Region and Capital One rolling into Richmond, right? And the impact is now to the industrial base. So we're passing off that impact now even further. I think there's some work to be done. I know folks at DoD-CIO are working on some plans. The folks at ANS within DoD are also working on some plans to really focus on that human capital piece. But I'm with you. That's one of the challenges that we've been seeing across the department and agencies is not having that technologist skill set at the level for especially a lot of the emerging tech. Good examples out there, right? I think we're doing a pretty good project on that. Look at Kessel Run in the Air Force. They're doing a great project on this. The question is, does that scale and can we sustain that long term? But I think the human capital problem is a significant one, and it's got to be a public-private partnership kind of thing to get it fixed, right? Definitely in the federal space, we're not going to do it by ourselves, and especially our industrial base is going to have a challenge doing it themselves. So how do we help build those pipelines to really be able to get the skill sets that we need coming in? Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
let's start to let Florence and then Charles.
I would say though, so you're not going to, more than likely not going to have a contracting officer or contract specialist become a technologist, but I don't think you're going to be able to get away if you're going to remain in the acquisition workforce, working on IT services, working on digital transformation. You're not going to get away from having to be trained or train yourself. When I go and talk to my different technologists, I humble myself, I have to say, I don't know some of this space, and I didn't know about like SLAs 5 years ago, but boy did I learn a lot about them as I was having to, write them into different solutions. But I think this, in terms of scale, there's the DITAP program, but there's also the ability to make sure that people understand, like I said from before, what they are buying, and be able to leverage their technologist allies to understand, like, it shouldn't be on the day that you're issuing an RFQ that you're asking about SLAs. Like, it's too late, So you should be from the what is the problem, posture, trying to figure out and tease out what is this that I'm really looking at. And asking the questions in order to fully understand what you're buying. And you're not going to become a technologist necessarily, but you're going to be a well-informed acquisition professional.
Right. Okay, we're going to go to Q&A in just a moment, but Charles, I know you had something you wanted to add on this.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think industry can help with this to a degree in that, first of all, going back to this the original thing we were talking about at the beginning, that, clarity of purpose around what the acquisition is trying to accomplish is critical. So to some extent, you can de-risk the issues around not having, say, the best or the readily available technical talent in your acquisition by really shaping that acquisition in terms of what the outcomes are expected and what those outcomes are going to do for the mission, and then that gives the community, the industry, the creativity to bring you solutions that are designed to achieve those outcomes, and it de-risks the details around, do you need to know if you've got all of the right technologists on board to really understand how to ask for those solutions. And then the other thing is, for a lot of IT, SLAs are actually fairly standard, and they are pretty common across industry, especially when you get into commercial companies buying IT services from other commercial companies. And so one thing that you can do there, of course, is through RFI or some other means, ask for what those SLAs should be. And I think what you'll see is they're pretty consistent in a lot of areas. Now, emerging technologies, areas like that, it's not going to be the case. But when you're talking about, IT operations, data center operations, cloud operations, things like that, they will be pretty consistent.
Excellent. I want to go to the audience. We have time for 2 or 3 questions, as long as we kind of make it lightning round here. So, yes, ma'am.
Just to follow up, you talked about shared space, and obviously with everybody moving to the cloud, the whole point is that they're away, they're remote, We had to drop a particular project because of that. We just couldn't get Microsoft to respond. So what are some of the pitfalls if you wanted to move your entire operation offsite out of a government space and hand it over to a contractor? What are some of the pitfalls of that? And has anybody done it?
Besides being stuck with a contractor forever and be dependent upon the contractor?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the big pitfall, because if once you move everything, you are dependent at that point in time. And if you have a disagreement with it, see, this goes back to how you're going to get out of it. That's always the issue of how do you back out of the contract and how you're going to proceed, and what are there penalties for getting out, which is always another issue. And then that'd be obvious penalties, and maybe, I can move all your data out, but it's going to cost you X number of dollars.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think it impacts our ability to get that organic capability, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's got to be a little bit of a balance, right? You can't outsource everything. Well, I'll give you, that's at least the federal perspective should be that from everybody at a federal agency, right? We can't just outsource everything that we do and have no organic capability. I don't think that's real. I think it's an unsustainable course of action. Right? So you're going to have to find a little bit of balance, and each situation is a little bit different. I'll give you an example. In DoD, a lot of times you'll go talk to a program office who did just that, right? So all our development is happening off-site at the vendor, and then somebody like me comes in and says, "Great, so let me see the source code for this, government off-the-shelf stuff you built," and they say, "Well, we don't have it." I'm like, "Really? Right? How does that work exactly?" So I think there's some thinking that needs to happen in that. There's some spaces where it makes sense, and then there's other spaces where we have to do a little bit of due diligence and not lose those core functional capabilities, or at least have them organically able to sprint up if need be.
And Charles, I think this is an appropriate one to give you the last word on. How would you work with people who are coming on this? What are the best practices to avoid running into that problem?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and so the issue is always transition out. How do you migrate out of the and so we do, for example, a lot of work remotely from service delivery centers that we have, and so I think a few keys to that. First, SLAs are critical around. That's how you know that you're getting the performance that you're expecting, regardless of whether you can see the people doing the operation or not. And insisting upon SLAs in the contract agreement, as well as a dashboard of some sort that gives you real-time visibility into that, so that's a way you can monitor it. I think the other thing too that's really common in commercial buying is that most contracts that we enter into will have a transition in requirement that has we have to provide a project plan of how we're going to transition into this service. What a lot of commercial companies do is they require a transition out to be put in the original bid, so that you can get an understanding of what that contractor is going to take in order to move your services to somebody else. So specifically ask them, if I decide to switch to another provider, how are you going to do that, and what is it going to cost me, and am I going to own the data, and all of those kinds of things. And by putting SLAs and transition out requirements into the original RFP, those are ways you can de-risk the issue of being trapped in the other vendor's environment.
I think that's a really key point, the transition in and out, but it's also for the acquisition workforce not dictating how that transition in and out looks, because I've seen that way too many times in terms of we within the government are dictating, this is how I want it done. This is how I want that transition to be done. And we are not the experts in that. And saying, how would you do it? And reaching out to industry and saying, what have you experienced in the past, and how can we be successful with those transitions in or out?
Excellent. And we are going to have to leave it there. One of the problems of putting 4 smart people on stage is that it's hard to sort of squeeze in all the answers. I know we have a networking break before too terribly long, and if you have questions, I'd encourage you to take them offline with this group. But please join me in thanking our panelists.